He is the former federal prosecutor, and now he works the defense side of the table. Brilliant legal analyst that you can hear him British broadcasting in New York City. I saw him on Fox 5 in New York, in San Francisco, television and radio, and on television and radio in Southern California. He's even been on Fox News Channel recently. I mean, they use him a lot. So we appreciate his time. He's the great David Katz, everyone.
Great to be with you.
Hello, sir. David, I want to start with this Ronna McDaniel thing only because we just had it pass through our news desk. And I was making the point before this even percolated to the point that it's now a news story that she might have a case here since she was so savaged by all the anchors on MSNBC and on Meet the Press on NBC. And could she have a case for, obviously, maybe wrongful termination, but more to the point, the kind of reputational harm that all of those anchors did to her? She now is talking about bringing such a case. Can you speak to the kind of chance that case might have?
Well, she was savaged. She was pilloried. She was spoken badly about. But she is a public figure. She was the head until very recently of the Republican National Committee. So this is the New York Times standard. She would have to show for defamation that they actually knew they were propounding falsehoods, or they were indifferent to the fact that there was a likelihood that they were propounding falsehoods.
So something false has to be said for it to really move along as a legit legal case.
Yeah, and to be defamatory. And, free speech, the idea is that she can defend herself. And by being a public figure, the idea is that she has access to the public medium, which she does. Now, apparently, CAA, which was her big booking agency, quit on her, which was, unfortunate timing, because you would think she'd be planning a big press counterattack. And maybe she is anyway. But certainly, if I were a producer at, CNN or certainly Fox, although Fox is a little fraught because of the whole thing with Trump, but certainly CNN and other media should want to have her on to tell her side of the story. Now, I suspect, and she should get her $300,000. They said she was going to get a salary of $300,000 per year, let's say. She's entitled to her $300,000, I would imagine. But what you're talking about, the reputational harm, there's a lot of give and take. One of the things that we've noticed about Trump is look at how much incoming Trump has taken, but there's a lot of outgoing too. And you can say it actually begins with Trump. There's more outgoing with Trump than there is incoming. But he's a battler. The one thing that's been remarkable about him, no matter how despicable he is in so many ways and so obnoxious and rude, but it's always like, you attack him, he attacks you back 3 times, or attacks you 3 times before you ever attack him. And I don't think that most people have that, even a public figure like Ronna McDaniel. She's from the Romney family and stuff. But it would seem to me she could put on a great counterattack. Now, one thing I have to say is interesting, and this is more political than legal, and I try to stick to my lane of legal. But I've certainly noticed the fact that, people say that there are a lot of microaggressions all over. And as you said, Mark, she hasn't suffered a microaggression from the left. She suffered a massive incoming, a massive, put down from the left. And as you say, from all of these commentators. And she sort of felt, and this Trump said, now you're in Never Never Land. The idea being that people who say we shouldn't be so polarized, we shouldn't be so cancel culture, we should hear what others have to say. Well, they're not very interested in hearing what she has to say, not on any of their news programs, but at the same time, it's their news programs, right? But she's now been in like 2 weeks, basically fired by Trump and fired by NBC at the behest of the liberal station. So you can see why, she sort of seems like one of these people like Liz Cheney, although Liz Cheney has landed on her feet a lot more, but kind of being in what Trump calls a no man's land. You're either on my side or you're over there with the left. And she tried to be, you could certainly depict it this way. She tried to sort of be in the middle, and she ended up with being no middle, right? Landing in quicksand, not landing on that island. The islands in the middle that people are always talking about ought to exist, and there ought to be not so much polarization. Now, I just do want to put this out. She stayed as the head of the Republican National Committee, not only during the election that Trump lost, but even after it lost. She sent memos about those alternate slates. So from the left-wing commentators on MSNBC, their point of view is that we're not canceling her because of her speech. It's because of her actions. From their point of view, it's putting one of the people who, from their point of view, she's lucky not to have been indicted up there in Michigan.
Right.
And we don't want to be on TV with somebody like that. So, I think that what she needs to do, my legal advice to her, and if she has the grounds to sue, more power to her. This is America. Anybody can sue anybody. But I think that what she should try to do is land on her feet. As I say, she's from the Romney side. She hasn't been indicted for anything. I think the statute of limitations is run. She should land on her feet, say, I'm a proud person from the middle. I tried to help my party win. And I haven't done anything wrong. And I have a lot of comments on the Trump campaign going forward. I can't believe that CNN or somebody wouldn't give her a big contract.
So that's the word on Ronna McDaniel. We'll see what she does. I think you make such good points. And it's always important to kind of get the legal reality, which is associated, as you've said, with were there falsehoods perpetuated or in some way? I mean, it doesn't appear, I know that there were, and also her visibility as a public figure, but it doesn't appear that there were any falsehoods launched. So anyway, we'll watch that with some interest. Speaking of falsehoods, you also mentioned Donald Trump. And of course, this is pretty amazing. After just getting this gag order in the hush money trial yesterday, he goes after the judge's daughter again today. This just broke. Kim had the update for us. On his Truth Social, he came forward with a... Kim, do you have the actual post that he offered? He goes up against the judge's daughter again. No, Kim, you do not? Merchan's daughter represents crooked Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Adam Shifty Schiff, and other radical liberals, and has just posted a picture of me behind bars, her obvious goal. Now, that was the original, wasn't that the original? Anyway, this happened while I was on the air, so sorry not to have this, but it just happened. We'll get the specifics, but what I want to ask you is, given the fact that he's just had a gag order issued on him, he can come forward less than a day later, say this, and what? He could be jailed, punished in some other way legally. What are the repercussions of Trump doing this?
Well, I think that all of these judges are reluctant to use the power of contempt to actually jail Trump. That's certainly what would happen with a normal defendant, even a normal white-collar defendant, even a well-heeled defendant. And they'd be smart enough to not make these kind of comments. But Trump obviously is making a different calculus of what the political benefit would be. Some Democratic judge jailing him in New York City. He'd probably be in jail for a couple hours. The Secret Service would be all involved. It would be the biggest story in the world. Another awful thing like that cargo ship hitting that invaluable bridge could happen. And yet Trump being in jail for the day would be the biggest story. And he knows that. And he would spin it his way. So given that judges are reluctant to enforce it that way, they could try to fine him, which is another alternative if you're held in contempt. But, when he was in the New York civil case where he ended up having to pay $455 million plus interest, I think he was fined for insulting the judge. What was it, Mark? $15,000? That's 0.00000.1. And the publicity alone was worth so much more than that. So I think the judges, and Trump realizes. And of course, it's an interesting question because it would seem sort of relevant. I mean, if right now the medical abortion case were being handled, by a judge somewhere in the country, and his daughter was someone who could be depicted as a right-wing anti-choice advocate, I'm sure the press would want to cover that. And so from Trump's point of view, here he is being told what to do and having a judge decide his fate. And the judge's daughter works for some left-wing organization. That's his depiction. If she really has a photograph of him in jail, I mean, people send those kinds of photos back and forth. But, when you're the judge's daughter, I mean, you would think that the judge would admonish her, look, we're going to be under a lot of scrutiny. That's the way it is. This is the life I chose. This is the honorable profession that I have. And people are going to not only make hay out of what I do, they're going to make hay out of what you do. So try to be really careful. And if she really does collect photos of Trump in jail, I think that some appellate court is going to say that that may be a fair comment.
So let me get this straight, he said. The judge's daughter is allowed to post pictures of her dream of putting me in jail. The Manhattan DA is able to say whatever lies about me that he wants. The judge can violate our laws and Constitution at every turn, but I'm not allowed to talk about the attacks against me and the lunatics trying to destroy my life and prevent me from winning the 2024 presidential election, which I am dominating. That's what he wrote. So it's kind of what you're saying, which is, hey, this is, it's real. He's not saying something that, he amps it up, he Trumpizes it. But anyway, the gag order.
If no one's thought of Trumpize, Mark, you need to go and patent that right away. That's a big word. Trumpize.
Yeah. He Trumpizes it. So the gag order that was imposed yesterday doesn't completely limit him from talking about his critics, as you said. And so on some level, we can't be triggered by this. But it was specified in the gag order that he's not supposed to talk about the judge's daughter. The judge's daughter is an adult, as everybody knows, but that doesn't mean anything. In the new America, where everybody's loaded for bear, and you can easily be fearful that somebody. Look at what happened to those Georgia election workers. You can be fearful that there could actually be some physical harm brought to the family of the judge. So it's not, it's not outside the range of possibility. I want to get to this mifepristone case because I think it's obviously huge. It's at the Supreme Court. That almost by definition makes it huge. But it involves women's reproductive choices and an extremely popular way that they deal with a very tough decision. These abortion pills are really what's at stake here. And I wonder if you could touch on, in discussing this I think it's from the 1800s, this no mailing of the of this. It's still on the, is it the Crowley or one of them? Comstock, thank you. Comstock, exactly. The Comstock Act. And it's odd that it's still in effect, technically. But if you could speak to this entire mifepristone thing and what's going on at the Supreme Court.
It's so interesting you mentioned the Comstock Act, because when I was a law clerk to a federal judge in Washington, D.C., the people who make Trojans, I think they're called Young's products, they brought a challenge because they weren't allowed to sell condoms through the mail. And my judge decided that it was commercial speech and that they had a right to engage in that kind of commercial speech. The manufacturers of the Trojan brand did. The case went to the U.S. Supreme Court and he was affirmed 9-zip. So wow. I think that the Comstock Act, while it may, be on the books, I think it's pretty much limited to, out and out pornography. I think the idea that you can't send anything, quote, sexual through the mail, it doesn't have anything to do with whether you can send a Trojan to someone who ordered it through the mail, or in this case, whether you can send these pills.
But to be pure about it, what you're saying, what David Katz is saying, is what the Comstock Act is, that it's considered obscene material. And if it's sent through the mail, it is a violation of that act.
I think it says something like obscene, sexual, something else. So you can argue that, well, of course, while a condom or a pill, a medical abortion pill, is not obscene, it's sexual, that somehow it's within that definition. But I think that my judge's case from years ago, and I think the precedents since then show that that's not a viable argument. Their argument is that the FDA, their strongest argument, and still very, very weak, is that the FDA did not properly vet it. They didn't do the proper procedures. And of course, Big Pharma is in an uproar. And we talked about the fact that this case made its way through the district court and the appellate courts. Mark, we talked about the fact that if you want to bet whether the U.S. Supreme Court is more theological or more commercially oriented toward the huge companies, they're going to go with Big Pharma, and they're not going to go with theological in this case. And anyway, their argument is that the FDA didn't properly vet it, the tests weren't good enough. And there's 2 points at which the FDA vetted it. They vetted it when it first went on the market. That part of the lawsuit seems to be dead, although that judge they went to down in Amarillo would have apparently bought all of their fringe arguments. But the second one is that when they tested again so that people can buy it through the mail, they can do it by telemedicine, and this is very important, that wasn't properly done by the FDA. And of course, the counter to that is that if you're going to allow that kind of argument, it's going to keep lots and lots of other drugs off. It's going to keep cancer drugs off the market. And that these huge pharmaceutical companies, that they make billions, but they do also spend an awful lot of money developing these drugs. Why would they develop the next wave of miracle drugs and invest that kind of money just to have some judge around the country say the FDA didn't properly approve it, take it off the market, and they will go the investment, they'll go the stockholders' money. And so the U.S. Supreme Court, I've always thought, I think you agreed with me, that they were going to go with the FDA and not make that kind of ruling, that they were not going to make that kind of ruling only for this pill because it would apply to so many other pills if the FDA really is going to have second-guessed its scientific expertise by judges all over the country who are not scientists and don't have the expertise, and they may be very smart, but this is no way to run the country. Here they ran into yet a different problem during the argument, which was standing. And the standing is who's hurt. And a lot of times, is a taxpayer hurt by the fact that they have to pay $20? That's been a big issue, taxpayer standing. But you have to have some kind of standing. You have to have someone who was hurt. The people who are supposedly hurt here that get this case into the courts are 7 doctors and dentists. And their argument is that there could be an emergency. Someone could have taken this pill. They could suddenly have a medical emergency. Somebody would be called in to do surgery or do something. And that doctor would be someone who has these religious scruples against doing anything that has to do with a person who's taken an abortion pill. And as Justice Kagan said, who's your person? Tell me one person. This is the safest pill in America. I'm going to say it again. This is the safest pill in America, plus it's very effective for women. But there's some incredibly tiny, infinitesimal amount of, there's 13 out of millions of people. It's safer than penicillin. It's safer than any other drug that you can imagine. So number one, the idea that some doctor is going to suddenly have to rush in, he's going to be one of the people, in the entire country is 13 people with a bad reaction. He's going to be the doctor who has to run in there on an emergency basis for one of those 13 people. And on top of that, they're allowed to opt out. The doctors who truly have a religious objection are already allowed to opt out. So it was pretty clear. Even people like Justice Gorsuch said, this looks like a case with no standing. Now, will they find someone in the future with standing and get back to the U.S. Supreme Court in a couple of years? Maybe they will. Maybe we'll have 13 members of the Supreme Court, including 4 who are brilliant and have common sense, who don't buy arguments like this. Maybe they'll reverse Dobbs.
I'd love to see that.
Maybe they'll reverse Dobbs if you have 13 on the U.S. Supreme Court. Because as soon as people talked about the horribles that would happen if they reversed Roe v. Wade, they talked about one of the horribles is that then it'll all be in control of the states. Well, of course, the anti-choice people want to have it both ways. They wanted it to go back to the states, but no, not really. They want to ban it. They want to ban it. And this would, if this got affirmed, and this decision I do not believe will be affirmed, I think that they will throw this out. There will be no relief for these 7 doctors and dentists who are trying to get this relief and have this medical drug taken off the market. 2/3 of the women get an abortion by this pill, not other ways. But had they gone the other way from what I think they're going to go, it would have affected blue states. You couldn't have gotten this pill in a blue state. You couldn't have gotten it by telemedicine. You might have to go in and see a doctor. You might have to drive 100 miles, miss a day or 2 days work in order to do it. They would have made it incredibly inconvenient, even in blue states. So hopefully that's not going to happen. I think the Supreme Court got this one right.
Yeah, you make a point that I made last hour about the fact that they talk about it wanting to go back to the states, and then they make it a federal thing right away. It's like the next step. But the thing that you mentioned that is really, I think, worth remembering, and I've made this point repeatedly in talking about the Supreme Court, and you're so kind to remember that I've made it also, is that this is an insanely business-friendly court. They're looking to help corporate America. They're looking to help commercial America. That's really where their bread is buttered. And you're so smart to point out, hey, don't forget, that pill is made by a big pharmaceutical company and they own this court. And that's exactly right. I saw a graph, says Beth, of deaths contributed to by drugs. Mifepristone, 4 per million. Viagra, 20 in a million. Wow. So that'll give you a sense for, it's safer than Viagra. Really a remarkable thing. This is Phineas asked this, and it's oftentimes something worth checking in on, David Katz. What happened to the separation of church and state? And it does seem as though a lot of these legal decisions are informed more by religious doctrine, or at least with a look back toward religion. Many of the plaintiffs are trying to get these various legal judgments through. They come from a strong religious background, and they seem to ignore this separation of church and state.
Well, the people who like to figure out, political views and stuff like that by looking at the background of people, you do have to notice that the U.S. Supreme Court is surprisingly Catholic oriented. I think something like 6 of the Supreme Court justices, 6 of the 9, went to Catholic schools. And I think I think Sotomayor is also a Catholic. So you can say, well, Sotomayor is a Catholic. She votes a certain way. But, Alito, Thomas, I think Roberts, I think Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, I think Amy Coney Barrett. There are 6 people, and then you have Sotomayor. And the irony is that then you have Kagan, who's Jewish, as RBG was Jewish. And then you have one Protestant. When I went to law school, I think they were just about all Protestants, including Thurgood Marshall. So that's been kind of an interesting thing. And, you have someone like Alito, if he doesn't want people to notice that, then Alito, after he was instrumental in the Dobbs decision, maybe shouldn't have gone to Rome and ballyhooed his decision. They used to say about JFK in the 1960 election, will he be controlled by the American people, or will he be controlled by the Pope? He was not controlled by the Pope. I thought he was a terrific president from what I remember of him. I was very young. I want your viewers to remember that, when JFK was in there. But Alito really, sort of played into that narrative. Now, when a case involves something like, a football coach saying a prayer and everyone having to participate in the prayer, that case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Those are considered the church and state case. This would not be considered a church and state case. Supposedly, this case is just about whether the FDA properly vetted, properly tested, and came to the conclusions, used the right data for this when they made the, I'm going to say the name wrong, mifepristone, the medical abortion drug. Yeah. So that's supposedly what the case is all about. But people have a right to their opinions, and notice the religious and political composition of the Supreme Court. Some people say, I'm always analyzing things legally, and some people say to me, you have such a legal sort of, correct or not correct legally analysis. And then all of a sudden, how often do you think judges rule against stuff that they really believe in? How much of it is judges basically voting what the judge wants philosophically and politically? But, number one, it's just corrosive to take that attitude. And secondly, as a trial attorney, which is basically what I am, someone who goes into the courts, I used to say this in law school. If you thought there was an 80% chance that this judge was going to vote against you no matter what you said, you still got to give your best argument, because there's a 20% chance that it's going to matter.
Yeah, they're well put. It's interesting that there is more, you can even keep that picture of the court up there, because there is more of a drumbeat for Sotomayor perhaps stepping away and retiring, and for her replacement then to be a more liberal leaning, or at least at worst a centrist justice. And increasingly, the legal punditry is talking in those terms. Now, she's only 69 years old. She's not, she's way younger than the presidential candidates. But I wonder if you could speak to the 3D chess of when a justice steps away.
Well, they do have a majority in the Senate. They need people like Manchin and the one from Arizona. But there's no reason to think that, they couldn't bring the nomination to the floor. It's not like when McConnell controlled the Senate and they would never bring Merrick Garland even up for a vote. So they could certainly bring their candidate up for a vote. And, if 51 or 52 senators are, what did Kavanaugh get, 51 or 52, something like that? It was thin. I don't know if that number is exactly right, but it was a thin majority. But with a majority in the Senate, they can't filibuster that. That's become the new rule. And so that you can do it with a majority, put someone on the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't know. I mean, to me, Sotomayor is in a totally different situation from RBG. I don't know all about her health, but it was well known that RBG had all of these health problems. And, I got to meet her. I told you the story already, Mark. I told your viewers that I had the honor to interview with her when she was still a professor at Columbia Law School. This would have been to be her law clerk on the appellate court, not on the U.S. Supreme Court. And I got to meet her. It was lovely. I've only disagreed, as I said before, with 2 decisions RBG ever made in her life: not to step down under Obama and not to hire me as her law clerk for the appellate court. So, I loved her. I admired her, but she stayed a little too long. But I just don't see it with Sotomayor. Let's rally and win this election. It's Trump, for God's sake. It's either going to be Trump or the other guy. Let's vote for the other guy, Look at the economy. Look at how things are going. Look at, Build Back America. Look at just so many different things. And, people want to pick apart, the border. They want to pick apart this and that and the other thing. Ask yourself, the stock market is up. People are employed. Inflation's coming down. Yes, it was high, right? But you look at all of those kinds of things, and you're going to put Trump in there? I mean, we've had 4 years of him already. Does anyone have a good memory? Think back to what it was like, So I think
have a question.
they're going to be reelected. I think that Biden's going to be reelected, and then we don't have to think about who's going to be on the U.S. Supreme Court in place.
Well, I mean, you could have a Biden reelection, and you could lose the Senate, which I think is very possible. I mean, I was trying to get Rothman to weigh in on that, but I think it's very possible the Democrats lose the Senate, even as Biden wins the presidency. That said, you still have Sotomayor is only 69 years old. I mean, I don't know, but there is a push for her to retire. I want to ask you about this. I saw it in the chat, and I thought it was worth visiting. Phineas says, Mark, ask Attorney Katz about the Florida documents case and how Judge Cannon has Smith in a bad spot in an illegal quagmire. Can you speak to the documents espionage case, all the documents jacked by the former president taken to these various properties?
Well, we talked about the fact that Jack Smith had a choice to make, whether to bring that case in Washington, D.C. federal court or to bring it down in the Southern District of Florida. He decided to bring it down there, knowing that he had a 1 in 3 chance of getting Cannon, and he got Cannon. The reason I thought he should have brought it in Washington, D.C. was because there was clearly venue there. I've dealt with a lot of these cases. I've tried to move for change of venue as a federal criminal defense attorney. I've managed to do it a couple of times, but the law is that it's totally up to the trial judge, and it's the trial judge that you pick. So the federal government, Jack Smith, would have gotten to pick DC. The only way the case would have been moved to Florida would have been if the judge who got it in Washington, D.C. said, oh my goodness, I don't really think the venue is as appropriate here as it would be down there. That's very, very unlikely to happen. And if it doesn't happen, as I say, the precedents are that you can't appeal it successfully. So it would have so likely have stayed in Washington, D.C. He took the documents from Washington, D.C. He got subpoenas to give them back from Washington, D.C. He knew he was obstructing justice by not giving them back in Washington, D.C. And I've always used the example, if he'd have gone to Paris, there was no jurisdiction in Washington, D.C. because he'd taken the documents to Paris. He would have had to try the case in Paris, France. That's an absurdity, and I thought it was an absurdity here. Now, in Jack Smith's defense, you can say, well, there were 2 other people that he thought were essential because his theory was that Trump did a lot of that machinations and obstructions through other people. And they might have moved to change venue. I don't think that would have mattered either, because if venue is right for one person, generally the law is that it becomes right for the co-defendant. So the co-defendants would have lost. But the situation he's in now, everybody can see what it is, unless she does something glaring that would get the appellate court to not only reverse her, but remove her and order that a different district judge be put on this case. And so it looks like she knows that. And so she's not going to do anything. At some point, they could just say she's stalling, but she's got to do something that makes it obvious that she's stalling. There are some issues in the case. So I just don't think he's going to get to trial. I don't think before the election, I don't think there's very much he can do about it. And the scary thing is that if Trump wins, of course, he'll order his attorney general not to pursue that case or the Washington, D.C. case any further. I'm still hoping the Washington, D.C. case goes to trial, because April 22nd or whatever it is, the U.S. Supreme Court hears presidential immunity. There's no there to presidential immunity. In this case, that would block the trial. So I think the Supreme Court's ruling in late May or in June will be the trial can go ahead. I think the district judge is ready to go. I think she's going to tell the lawyers be ready to go. And so I'm hoping that there's going to be a trial in late summer, early fall. Early fall is probably more likely, but before the election, that trial will start and streamline. There's only one defendant. It could actually go to a verdict before the November 5th election mark. It really could.
Well, I have learned that there are more ways to delay a trial and to delay a final judgment than I ever thought possible. As we've all become educated on the law through you and just in the general zeitgeist now, wow, delay tactics abound. David, thank you for your time. We look forward to catching you between now and next time on London radio, on New York TV. You're all over the place. I mean, you're on television really more than most of game show hosts who are, I just see you everywhere, and you're always great. You always bring it, man. Thanks a lot for being here.
It's great to be with you, and I hope people will remember it. Usually it's Thursday at noon. This was great. You accommodated me today, but usually it's Thursday at noon.
Yeah, we did surprise the audience. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, we moved David today because to accommodate his schedule. Good stuff, David Katz. Thank you.
Wonderful to be with you. Take care.
Yep. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.